Have you ever had that feeling that you're not alone, even when all the doors are locked? If this feeling is familiar to you, leave a like. It's a way for me to know I'm not the only one feeling this. And if you have the courage to stay here with me, to hear what happens when the world sleeps, subscribe to the channel because the night is long and full of stories. Now, I need a favor. I want to know who's out there on the other side of the screen. Tell me in the comments the city you're watching from and what time it is where you are now. I want to get an idea of how many of us are awake together, staring into the same darkness. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, you learn to appreciate order, clear lines, rules of engagement, a defined hierarchy. The civilian world, by comparison, had always seemed like a chaos of invisible borders and unwritten agreements. That's why I bought the house, a small plot of land in the middle of the Maine woods, with a single neighbor about a quarter of a mile away. I wanted quiet. I wanted lines that wouldn't move. The barbed wire fence that separated my property from that of my neighbor, Mr. Peterson, seemed like a good place to start. Peterson was a tough guy, the kind who seemed to have been carved out of the Maine landscape itself. A widower, he lived alone, and our interactions were limited to a brief nod as our trucks passed on the dirt road. To me, he was the perfect neighbor. The problem started with a boulder, a large, flat, moss-covered rock that had been the corner marker of my property for decades, according to city maps. One morning, I noticed that it had been moved, not very far, maybe 3 feet into my property. I figured it must have been the work of an animal or the spring thaw. I rolled the boulder back to its place. The next day, it had moved again, this time about 6 feet. And there was a clear trail on the ground, as if it had been deliberately dragged. That was when the peace began to fade. This was not nature's doing. I went to Peterson's house. He answered the door, his hands greasy and his eyes blank. "Mr. Peterson," I began as calmly as I could, "I noticed that the property marker has been moved." He wiped his hands on a rag, his eyes never leaving mine. "The line is where it is," he said, his voice low and uninflected. "The scripture says she is where the stone was," I replied. He stepped forward, closing the door part way with his body. "Scriptures are paper. The floor is the floor." And he closed the door in my face. That was the end of the conversation and the beginning of the war. The passive aggression turned into something more sinister. The next week, I found a dead rabbit lying right on the new line Peterson had created. Its belly was ripped open. A few days later, it was a crow hanging upside down from a tree branch that overlooked my property. These were messages, macabre offerings on an altar of dirt and mud. I called the local sheriff. A tired man with a beer belly came to my house, listened to my story, looked at the moved stone and the ground. "Look, son," he said with a sigh, "land disputes are complicated, and I can't arrest a man for a dead rabbit. Try talking to him again." I knew it was useless. I was alone in this. In my entire life, I have only known one kind of negotiation: when diplomacy fails. I follow the thinking of Chris Hedges, the journalist who wrote about war. What was the name of his book? "War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning." He said that war exposes the human capacity for evil, stripping it of all pretense. I was seeing this happen, not in a foreign wilderness, but in my own backyard. I decided to set up a hunting camera hidden in a tree pointed toward the property line. I needed proof. The first night, It caught nothing but a deer passing by. The second night, however, it caught something. At 3:17 a.m., the camera activated. The infrared image showed Peterson. He wasn't moving the rock. He was standing on my side of the line, staring at my house. He stood there motionless for over an hour, a predator waiting in the dark. The last shot was the worst. He walked up to the tree, looked directly into the camera lens inches away, and smiled, a smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. Then he lifted a hammer, and the screen went black. The next day I was outside, fixing the fence he had damaged when he walked by. I saw him coming out of his house, walking toward me. His hands were not empty. He was holding a short-handled axe, the kind you use for splitting firewood. He was not walking in a hurry. His steps were heavy, deliberate. My military training screamed inside me, assess the threat, find a weapon, create distance. But my body froze for a second. This wasn't a battlefield. This was my home. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, stopping a few feet away from me. His voice was a low growl. "This is my house, Peterson," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. My hand gripped the hammer I was using. He didn't say anything else. He simply stepped forward, raising the axe. The world moved in slow motion. I dodged, metal whistling where my head had been seconds before. The rush of adrenaline freed me. This was no longer a neighborly dispute. This was a fight for my life. I hit him in the shoulder with a hammer, and he roared, a guttural animal sound. He dropped the axe, but threw himself at me. We rolled on the ground in the mud and dead leaves. He was strong, with the brute strength of a man who's worked with his hands all his life. His fingers tightened around my throat, the world beginning to darken around the edges. With the last of my strength, I shoved my fingers into his eyes. He screamed and loosened his grip, and I managed to push him away and stand up, gasping for breath. The police arrived and took him away. He couldn't resist. He was sitting on the floor crying silently. I was later told that he had a complete mental breakdown after his wife died years ago. The loneliness was eating him up inside. I sold the house a week later at a loss. I could no longer look at that forest without feeling the weight of his gaze. I had been to war and seen what men would do for a flag, for an order. I never thought I would see the same for a handful of land and silence. Does every man have a line in the ground, literal or figurative, that if crossed, turns him into an animal? Or is the animal always there, waiting patiently under the skin, needing only the right excuse, a rock moved, a fence broken, to take over? I don't have the answer. I only know that the worst borders are not the ones that separate countries, but the ones that separate a man from his own brutality. I've always thought that true peace resided in the quiet of the suburbs. After years of living in paper walls with noisy neighbors in Cleveland, the idea of a small house on a dead-end street in some forgotten part of Ohio seemed like paradise. I'm a sound designer for indie games, so my job is a constant pursuit of aural clarity. The hum of an air conditioner, the shuffling of feet upstairs, all of it taints my recordings. Moving here was a professional decision as much as a personal one, a way to escape the echoes of my recent breakup. The house was modest, with a small front lawn and a backyard separated by a picket fence. My neighbor on the right was a man I guessed was in his 70s, Mr. Smith. His house was immaculate. The grass looked as if it had been cut with a ruler, and the windows were sparkling. He, however, was a ghostly figure. I saw him rarely, always with his back turned, tending the garden or picking up the trash with silent efficiency. Never a wave, never a good morning. The weirdness began in the second week. It was almost midnight, and I was in my kitchen drinking a glass of water when I saw a dim light coming from his backyard. I looked out the window, and there was Mr. Gable in his pajamas and robe, holding a hose and methodically watering his cement patio. Not the grass, not the few potted plants, but the bare gray concrete. The water ran down, forming a dark mirror in the porch light, and disappeared into a drain in the corner. I thought it was odd, but I shrugged it off. Maybe he was cleaning something, an oil stain, who knows? Older people have their quirks. My grandfather, for example, used to polish the doorknobs every single day, but the next night, at the same time, the scene repeated itself, and the next, and the next, always the same ritual. The porch light would come on, Mr. Gable would come out, and with the patience of a monk, water the cement for about 10 minutes before picking up the hose and disappearing. It was starting to bother me. It wasn't a fear, not yet, but an unease. The feeling of watching a movie where a single frame is corrupted. The sound of water hitting concrete was soft, almost a hiss, and it became the soundtrack to my early mornings. During the day, his yard was perfectly dry and clean, with no evidence of nighttime activity. I started to feel like the character in that movie, the one with Jeff Goldblum who turns into a fly. No, the one with Jimmy Stewart who spies on his neighbors. I remembered the actor's name, but the movie's, Rear Window. Yeah, that's exactly it. I was the man in the window watching something that was probably none of my business. What had been a peculiar habit became an obsession. Mine, not his. I found myself waiting for midnight. The ritual was always identical, and this mechanical repetition was what disturbed me most. There was no variation, no emotion. It was an act devoid of any apparent purpose. I follow Hannah Arendt's thinking about how the greatest atrocities can arise not from hatred, but from an absence of thought, from bureaucratic routine. I saw in Mr. Gable an embodiment of this, the banality of evil, perhaps, manifested in the most useless task imaginable. He wasn't cleaning up anything, he was performing a function. The breakdown in my ability to rationalize happened one Saturday afternoon. I was fixing a loose slat in my fence, the one that bordered his yard. Mr. Gable was not home. Curiosity got the better of me. Heart pounding, I peeked through a crack. The cement yard was, as usual, immaculate. But as I got closer, I caught a faint, sweet chemical smell, like bleach mixed with something organic that was decaying. I glanced at the drain in the corner of the yard. There was a dark stain around it, barely visible, as if the concrete there had absorbed something that the water could not completely wash away. That night, paranoia set in. I could no longer see watering as a harmless habit. It was an act of erasure. He was washing something night after night. What would happen if he stopped? Would the stain come back? Would the smell get stronger? I considered calling the police, but what would I say? My neighbor waters his yard and there's a strange smell near the drain. They would think I was crazy. I was completely alone in this. I decided to use my equipment to my advantage. I set up a parabolic microphone, the kind I use to capture specific sounds in nature, and pointed it at his house during the day. It was completely silent. No TV, no radio, no coughing. It was like pointing the microphone at a grave. Then at midnight, the ritual began. The lights came on. Mr. Gable appeared. The hiss of water began. But beneath the sound of the hose, the microphone picked up something else. A low, rhythmic, wet sound. A sound of something being rubbed against cement. A sound of stiff bristles scraping the surface. He wasn't just watering. He was scrubbing hard, erasing a stain that only he and now I knew was there. The blood ran cold in my veins. I wasn't witnessing a mania. I was witnessing the cover-up of a crime repeated nightly like a macabre prayer. The next morning, I was determined to leave. I put my house on the market that same day. I packed my things in a frenzy of fear and adrenaline. Every creak of the floorboards in my own house sounded like an accusation. I glanced out the window every 5 minutes, expecting to see Mr. Gable watching me back, but his house remained a fortress of silence. On my last night there, with the house full of boxes and the echo of my own loneliness, I couldn't resist. I walked to the kitchen window one last time, just before midnight. His porch light came on, punctual as death. But this time, he didn't reach for the hose. He walked to the center of the yard, stopped, and slowly turned his head toward me. He looked straight at my window. There was no way he could see me in the dark, but I knew he was looking at me. Then he did something that completely shattered my perception of reality. He smiled, a small, restrained, almost polite smile, and he waved, a slow, deliberate wave. I dropped to the ground, my heart racing, my breath catching in my throat. He knew. All along, he knew I was watching. The ritual wasn't just for him. It was for me, too. A performance, a silent threat. I ran away that very night. I left half my things behind. I drove for hours aimlessly, just to put distance between myself and that silent street. Today, I live in an apartment in the center of a noisy city. The sound of traffic, sirens, and people going about their lives calms me down. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, when everything is quiet, I hear the ghostly hiss of a hose. I never knew what was under that cement. Maybe nothing. Maybe I created a monster out of an old man's loneliness and my own fertile imagination. But what about the smell and the sound of the brush and that wave? My grandfather used to say, there are doors that are better left unopened because you never know what you'll have to close next. I didn't open any doors, but I looked out the window and I saw something I shouldn't have. I keep thinking about this. Does evil need a stage, screams, and blood to be real? Or does it hide right there in the most banal routine, watering the cement to erase stains that only it can see? I don't have the answer. I only know that there are silences that are much louder than any scream. I've always been a distractible person. Ever since I was a child, my mother used to say that my head was always in the clouds, and the proof was in the trail of objects I left behind wherever I went. Pens, gloves, keys, books. Moving to a small apartment in Portland, Oregon for a 6-month internship didn't change that. The difference was that now there was no one to remind me to pick up my things. My next-door neighbor in the hall was Mrs. Elroy, an elderly woman with white hair and a smile that seemed to be permanently embroidered on her face. The first week, she knocked on my door to return a glove I had dropped on the sidewalk. Time is deceiving here, dear. You'll need this, she said in a sweet voice. I thanked her, thinking it was a nice gesture. A week later, she knocked again. This time, it was my copy of Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. I found it in the building's communal laundry room, she explained. I know a good book when I see one. I was a little surprised, since I was pretty sure the book was on my nightstand, but my memory has never been reliable. I thanked her again. The real weirdness began with the pearl earring. It was a pair my grandmother had given me, my only real possession of value. I was pretty sure I had taken them off my dressing table before I went to bed. The next morning, one of them was gone. I searched everywhere in a panic. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Elroy knocked on my door. In her wrinkled palm was my earring. It was on the mat outside your door, she said, smiling. I almost stepped on it. Be more careful, dear. My blood ran cold. There was no way the earring could have gotten there. I hadn't opened the door since the night before. I began to feel watched. The walls of my apartment, which had once felt like a haven, now felt thin and porous. I followed the thinking of that writer, the one who wrote about surveillance. George Orwell, of course. He said that the worst thing was not to be hated, but to be ignored. For me, the worst thing was to be watched, to have my personal life invaded in such a subtle way. The final act took place on a rainy Tuesday. I came home exhausted, and as I searched my purse for my cell phone, realized it was gone. I rummaged through everything. I dialed my own number from the apartment's landline and heard the ringing coming from the other side of the wall, from Mrs. Elroy's apartment. I hesitated for a long minute, the sound of the call echoing in the silence of the hallway. Finally, I knocked on her door. She opened it almost instantly with that usual smile. Before I could say anything, she held out her hand, holding my phone. You dropped it in your car, honey. The window was open a little and I saw it shining on the seat, she said. I picked it up for you so no one would steal it. I didn't have a car. I used public transport. I stared at her, the lie hanging between us in the humid air. Her smile didn't waver. It was then that I understood. This wasn't my distraction or coincidence or kindness on her part. This was a game, a silent, terrifying power play. She was showing me that she could come into my life, my space, whenever she wanted, without leaving a trace. I took the phone from her hand, mumbled, "Thank you," and locked myself in my apartment. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor, hugging my knees and listening to the silence. The next day, I quit my internship and moved back in with my parents. To this day, I wonder about Mrs. Elroy. What was her goal? Was it a twisted form of loneliness, a need to connect? Or was it something darker, a sadistic pleasure in dismantling another person's sense of security, object by object? Which is scarier, a ghost haunting a house, or a real person who can walk through its locked walls and return its secrets with a smile? I've always felt that a musician has a different relationship with silence. For most people, silence is the absence of sound. For me, a cellist, silence is the blank canvas on which music will be born. It's a sacred space. After my wife and I separated, I moved into an old brick building in Chicago looking for just that, a space to fill with my own music, not the memories of a life together. The apartment was on the third floor and had what realtors call character, a euphemism for old and with unpredictable acoustics. For the first few days, it was perfect. The sound of my cello filled the space, the notes of Bach echoing off the hardwood floors. The first time I noticed it, it was subtle. I was practicing a particularly difficult passage from Suite Number 1. I missed a note, stopped, took a deep breath, and in the silence that followed, I heard a muffled sound coming from the floor. It was the same passage with the same mistake, played faintly like a distant echo. I thought it was my imagination, the building settling, or perhaps a strange echo the old structure was producing. But it happened again. The next day, I was playing Vivaldi. As I finished a movement, the ghost version started up downstairs, a few seconds behind. It was a carbon copy, note for note. My first reaction was irritation. Was it another musician trying to practice along with me? It was a bizarre coincidence, but still within the realm of possibility. The problem was that the echo wasn't limited to music. One night, I got up to get a drink of water and tripped over a book, which fell to the floor with a dull thud. 3 seconds later, the same thud came from below. My heart raced. I tested it. I clapped my hands 3 times. Clap, 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 dot, silence. And then, pum, pum, pum. The muffled sound, the same cadence coming from the ground. This wasn't an echo. It was an imitation. There was someone in the apartment below listening to every sound I made and playing it back. The sense of violation was immediate and absolute. My sanctuary of silence had become a resonance chamber, and I was the tuning fork. The days that followed were an exercise in paranoia. My every step, my every cough, my every object I moved was followed by its phantom replica. I began to walk on tiptoe, holding my breath. The silence I had been seeking so much was now my only weapon. If I didn't make a sound, my mysterious neighbor wouldn't either. We lived in a shared, tense silence for almost a week. I've always been struck by a quote from that Danish philosopher. What's his name? Oh yes, Søren Kierkegaard. I follow his line of thinking that the worst form of despair is not choosing to be yourself. I was being robbed of myself, of my own sounding existence. My actions were no longer my own. They became a script for the ghost downstairs. The final straw was when I decided to confront him. I needed to know who or what was doing this. I came up with a plan. I picked up my cello, and instead of playing a familiar piece, I improvised. I created a short, dissonant, unique melody, a sonic signature that only I could produce at that moment. I played it once and waited, my heart in my mouth. The silence stretched on for 10 seconds, 20, a minute. I felt an immense relief. Maybe it was over, maybe I was crazy after all. And then I heard it, coming from the floor, my improvised melody note by note, with the same hesitation, the same strength in my fingers. It was the breaking of logic. It was impossible. It was no longer about someone listening to me. It was like someone was living my life with a delay of a few seconds. In a fit of rage and fear, I marched to the door of the apartment below 2B and pounded on the wood. "I know you're in there. Stop it. Who are you?" I yelled at the silent door. No answer. I pressed my ear against the cold wood, listening for any sound. And it came. The muffled sound of fists pounding on wood in time with my own, and then a faint voice, distorted by the door, repeating my own words. "I know you're there. Stop it. Who are you?" I recoiled as if shocked. This apartment wasn't imitating me. It was absorbing me. I ran away that night. I abandoned the apartment and most of my things. For months, I lived in hotels, always asking for the top floor room. Today, I have a new place, a small single-story house. No neighbors upstairs or downstairs, but the experience has left a scar. A week ago, I received a letter from my former building manager. It was an official notice from the condominium, dated my last week there. It was a noise complaint filed against me by the resident of apartment 4B, the floor above. The complaint said that I was making repetitive, imitative noises as if mocking the sounds of the building day and night. Do we go crazy alone, or do we need an echo to confirm our own existence? And what is scarier? A neighbor who imitates you, or discovering that in the silence, you have become an echo of yourself? I don't know the answer. I only know that sometimes when a house is too quiet, I swear I hear the sound of someone breathing exactly in time with me, and I pray that it is me. I've always felt that walking barefoot on the cold floor of an empty apartment is a rite of passage. It makes you feel like you're truly starting over. In this case, the floor was light beige porcelain tile, but cold like morgue marble. I moved in on a Tuesday, alone. The building was new, just delivered by the construction company. I was the first resident in Block B. Not even the stairwell lights were calibrated yet. They took seconds too long to turn on, like they were testing you in the dark. That first night, I slept on a mattress on the floor, just like in the movies. And yes, I slept, even with the wind howling through poorly sealed windows and a strange buzzing sound coming from the kitchen, like a faulty electric motor. The weirdest thing that first night wasn't the noise. It was the absence of other people's noise. I expected at least a TV on somewhere, footsteps above, a toilet flushing. But no, only my sounds existed. The next morning, I went down with a bag of trash. The ground floor dumpster was empty, too clean. Behind me, a tall man entered the lobby. Business attire, black briefcase, gray hair. He nodded slightly and stood waiting for the elevator. "First day?" I ventured. He looked at me like he was trying to remember who I was. "Yeah, B302. Do you live here?" "Me? Number I work in inspections." He tapped the briefcase. "The building still has pending issues." The elevator door opened. He didn't step in, just stood there, watching. "Aren't you going up?" "Number I'm waiting for someone else." I went up, alone, and for some reason, maybe a dumb impulse, I turned to look back. He was still there, but now staring at the lobby camera like he was posing for a photo no one asked for. They installed the internet 2 days later. On the condo app, no other unit was marked as occupied. Not a single one. I thought it was odd. I called the management office. "Oh, Mr. Gustavo, yes, Block B is ready, but the other residents aren't moving in until next month." The handover was delayed. I asked about the inspector. The woman hesitated. "We haven't authorized anyone yet. Might be someone from the construction company. Want me to check?" I told her not to bother. That night, I dreamed of someone calling my name. Nothing dramatic, just someone knocking and saying, "Gustavo," with the wrong inflection, like reading off a name tag. I woke up with my heart racing and one fixed idea. Check the door. It was locked. The hallway security camera, which I could only access through a weird app shortcut, showed the corridor empty. I went back to bed and tried to forget. I started hearing noises at 3 a.m., always around that time. It would begin with a click, like a light switch. Then something like footsteps, slow, hesitant, as if someone was testing the floor with their heels. The sound came from above, like the apartment upstairs had been quietly occupied. A week later, I went up, apartment 402. I knocked, no answer. I looked under the door, no light beneath the threshold. The next day, I mentioned it to the building manager, who laughed and said, "You're the only one in that block, man. If there's noise, it's the plumbing or something." But the sound had rhythm. And the strangest part, sometimes the steps stopped right above my bedroom for minutes without moving. On Saturday, my brother Leandro came over. He's always been more rational, works in security systems. He showed up with beer, trashed the neighborhood, and made jokes about how empty the building felt. "If someone kills you here, no one's gonna find out till next month," he laughed. By the third beer, I mentioned the noises. He made the usual dismissive face, but stopped. "What if it's not plumbing? Maybe the construction crew left someone doing last-minute work upstairs. Nighttime's common for that." I showed him the hallway camera feed from the floor above. No activity between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., just one weird flicker at 3:04. But the image was too grainy to tell. "That's interference," he said. "Cheap internal cameras in low-end buildings share frequency. You probably caught a signal from another floor." But the building only has 3 floors. That night, I decided to go upstairs at 3 a.m. I opened the door slowly, phone in hand. The hallway was dark, but the motion sensor turned on late. As usual, the overhead light flickered once before stabilizing. I climbed the stairs carefully. The noise had started. Slow footsteps, one every 5 seconds. I reached 402, locked. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. I went back down feeling ashamed, like I'd believed in some childish superstition. But that same night, at 4:21, I heard a new sound. A short, metallic tap at dry. And the next day, I noticed something I'd never seen before. On the kitchen wall, opposite the fridge, there was a slightly lighter rectangle, the size of a hidden door. I touched it. The sound was different, more hollow. Like Susan Sontag said, "All terror is a form of knowledge." I follow that thought. Sometimes knowing too much just means giving up your peace of mind. The real question is, what do you do when the structure that should protect you starts to feel like a design flaw? When a wall sounds like it's hiding a space that's not on the blueprint? And worse, when you're sure that on the other side someone already knows you've noticed. On Monday, I opened the original floor plan of the apartment. It was in a contract, buried in a forgotten PDF in the cloud. The kitchen wall, the one that sounded hollow, was supposed to be solid. Solid concrete, no piping, no utility shaft. But something was off in the measurements. The space between the kitchen columns and the hallway seemed wider by about 40 centimeters. That consumed me for days. I tried to keep living, working from home, cooking badly, inviting my brother over for a Saturday night. But I always came back to that wall. I started noticing other details. The floor there had a slight incline. You couldn't see it, only feel it with the soles of your feet. Like one side of the kitchen was sinking ever so slightly. I did a dumb test with a marble. It always rolled toward the hollow wall every time. I told Leandro about it. He laughed, then stopped. "Here's what you do, man. Record it. Leave your phone recording overnight, facing the wall. Sometimes the mic picks up stuff we don't hear." I did. The next morning I listened to the whole thing. 4 hours of silence and white noise. But between 3:17 and 3:19, the mic picked up 2 knocks, slow, like someone hidden from the other side with a closed fist. I opened the hallway cam app for the floor above. No movement, no one in or out. And then, for the first time, the thought came, what if it's not someone above? What if it's someone beside me? I tried to shut the idea down, made up errands, went back to running, scheduled a dentist appointment. I even joined the condo's WhatsApp group. Despite being the only person living in Block B, that's where someone sent a message in the middle of the night. Resident A, Block A. Did anyone else hear a hammering noise coming from Block B? Resident B, Block A, around 3 a.m.? Yeah, thought it was construction. But no one works that late. I didn't reply. But the noise wasn't from all of Block B. It was coming from my unit. One night, I lost control, got up at 3:05, grabbed a flashlight and a screwdriver. I pressed my hand to the wall, marked a point in the paint, and started prying. It took longer than I expected. The paint chipped. The drywall caved. The screwdriver pierced through a dry layer too thin to be concrete. Behind it was a space, hollow, dark. I managed to open enough to peek in with a flashlight. It was a cavity about 1 meter wide. No tile, no finish. A space that didn't exist in the plans. The inner walls had stains, vertical streaks, like something had dripped down. There were old tape marks and pressure marks along the sides, like something had been leaning against it for a long time. No wires, no pipes. But in the far corner, near the ceiling, my flashlight caught something that froze me. A strip of masking tape stuck to the wall, with 3 strands of hair stuck to it. I sealed the hole with cardboard, electrical tape, and shoved a cabinet in front of it. The next day, I took my laptop to a co-working space and stayed out until dark. Leandro showed up unannounced. Thought I was spiraling. When I told him about the cavity, he got serious. That structural man, a design flaw, could be a space for a shaft they never installed, but hair? He wanted to see it. We moved the cabinet, pulled off the cardboard, but the hair was gone. So was the tape. Nothing. The wall was clean, still stained, but no trace of what I'd seen. And that's when the most unsettling thing happened. Leandro looked at me and said, "You sure you're okay? Because this hole, it's not new. Look at these edges. Someone worked on this before you moved in." I became obsessed with the idea that the apartment was delivered like this, with a hidden space, with something removed. I started smelling a strange odor at night, like burnt plastic, that came and went too quickly. I searched engineering forums, watched inspection videos, learned that sometimes sealed tech shafts get closed off sloppily by third-party contractors. But none of that explained the silence, or the knocks, or the fact that after moving the cabinet again that same night, I found a screw on the floor I didn't remember seeing before. A new screw, dust-free, exactly where my bed touches the wall. And I started forgetting things. Small but weird, like why I moved so quickly. I always thought it was because of the old rent, but was I evicted? Or did I quit my job first? I don't remember what I told Leandro anymore. This week I turned off the doorbell. Someone rang it at exactly 3 a.m. 3 times. I didn't go to the door, but I know I was alone. The ground floor camera showed no one entering, no one leaving. And today, when I woke up, I saw a new post on the building's condo app. Please avoid making noise between 3 and 4 a.m. Some residents reported strange sounds in Block B under investigation. I'm still the only resident in Block B. Like Clarice Lispector once said, you can't live without a little madness. I follow that thought. Maybe because the opposite of madness isn't sanity, it's blindness. The refusal to see what's there, on the edge, in the space between walls. The question I can't shake is, who else knows about the cavity? Because yesterday, when I woke up on the kitchen floor with no memory of how I got there, the cabinet was back in place, and the hole had been patched with fresh plaster. On Tuesday, May 21st at 3:06 a.m., I decided to record a video, not to expose anything, not to report it, just for me, because I was starting to doubt my own memory. I needed a record, a way to see if my voice still sounded like mine. I propped the phone on the kitchen counter, the sealed cavity behind the cabinet, the light on. I looked into the lens and said, "My name is Gustavo. I live in B302. This building was delivered 2 months ago. I'm the only resident in this block, and I'm afraid of what they built here." I stayed quiet after that, waiting. Almost 3 minutes of silence. Then I heard it. Again, the sound from the other side of the wall. But this time, it wasn't knocking. It was movement, a dragging sound, muffled breathing. I rushed to the cabinet, pulled it aside, grabbed the screwdriver, punched through the fresh plaster, and started opening. But on the other side, there was no longer a cavity, just raw brick, rough. The cement slapped on carelessly, as if someone had sealed it in a rush from the inside. And the most disturbing thing, in the lower right corner, in small, uneven letters drawn in the dust on the wall, there was a message: "Don't make noise at 3. The video file got corrupted. It exists, has a duration, a file size, everything, but when I open it, it only shows me perfectly still for 5 minutes. No audio, no ambient sound, not even my face moves, as if I had frozen the entire time." Leandro said it was a recording glitch, but I remember, I spoke, I heard, and I saw what I wrote. But when I went back hours later, the dust was gone. The next day, the building manager called, said the construction company wanted to inspect some units. I asked why. He said it was routine. "Which block are they starting with?" I asked. "Block B, of course. Of course." When the two men arrived, uniforms, polite smiles, clipboard in hand, I felt a physical panic. Cold sweat, no reason. They entered like they already knew the place. One of them stopped in front of the kitchen wall, tapped it with his knuckles. "Any leaks here?" I said no. He nodded like he knew I was lying. They went through their checklist, checked outlets, inspected the fuse box, and as they were leaving, one of them turned and said, "Try to keep it quiet after 3. The block is still going through acoustic calibration." Acoustic calibration. I stood at the door for a long time after they left, hand on the frame, like closing it would be a point of no return. And maybe it was. Since then, the knocking stopped, the noise ended. But the fear changed form. I started noticing other things. The stairwell light now takes an extra second to turn on, and sometimes when I wake up, it feels like I'm lying on a thinner mattress, like I've been sleeping somewhere else. Similar, but not the same. Like Jean-Paul Sartre said, hell is other people. I follow that thought. Because in this building, there are no other people. And hell still came. It came in the form of extended silence, of spaces between walls, of sounds no one else seems to hear. It came in the shape of doubts that corrode. Was it a design flaw? An experiment? A mistake? Someone sealed up with drywall and forgetting? Or worse, a test in cohabitation, a study of how long someone can endure living alone in a building, knowing that someone or something is watching from inside the structure. The management company called yesterday. Other residents will be moving in next week. They asked if I'd like to attend a welcome coffee. I said yes, of course I did. But I'm selling the apartment. Changed the lock. I sleep with earplugs now. The problem isn't what I heard, it's what I was forced to realize. Sometimes architecture hides more than flaws. It harbors intent. And sometimes a place was never meant for you to live in, just to last. And I don't know how much longer I'll last here. Some days you don't know for sure if you were being watched. You just feel it. No proof, no image. Just that pressure in your stomach, like a step missed. That's how it started the first week. The street was new, part of a recently built residential development. Only 5 houses occupied. The rest still under construction or locked up. Mine sat in the middle, no front wall yet, freshly laid grass, and the occasional bark from some distant lot. Directly across from me, house 112. Identical layout, flipped, beige paint, aluminum awning over the front window, white curtains. And behind the curtain, a man who never looked away. I first saw him on Monday around 6 p.m. I was sweeping my driveway, glanced up by reflex, and he was there, standing in the front window, shoulders square, arms crossed, no lights on behind him. Didn't think much of it at first. Some people keep to themselves. But the next day, same time, same place. On Wednesday, I opened my kitchen curtain in the morning. He was already there. I began to notice he was never sitting, never moving visibly, always standing, always with his head turned directly toward my house. He didn't follow my movement, didn't wave, just stared. I mentioned it to a coworker, more as a nervous joke than a complaint. "I think I've got a fan across the street," she laughed. "Could be worse, at least yours is quiet." But I didn't feel lucky or safe. That Friday, I shut all my curtains before sunset, except the one in the kitchen, habit. Even with the house dim, I could tell his reflection in the window showed he was still there. That same outline, still, like a mannequin, a place to observe. Saturday, I was out all day. When I got back that night, I went straight to the window. He was there, same spot, same posture. But the house behind him was lit this time, and that's what unsettled me. For the first time, I could see his face, or parts of it, a pale, thin man, receding hairline, expressionless, with a gaze that wasn't angry or friendly, just empty, like someone watching not to see, but to fill the space with presence. I decided to contact the developer, called Monday morning, spoke to someone in the technical department. The house across from mine, 112, how long has it been occupied? Typing. A pause. It's actually listed as unsold, still unoccupied. No water or power connected yet. Are you sure? Yes. It's been locked up since handover, only used during the launch phase for walkthroughs. I set my phone down slowly, as if the call itself might leak something into my house. I looked out the window. He was still there. I thought about calling the police, but say what? There's a man watching me from a house that's officially empty. I started keeping my lights off whenever possible, moving around the house quietly, avoiding the front hallway, sleeping with the AC on high. Not for comfort, but to drown out outside noise. Even so, at night, I could feel it. My eyes would find the window on their own, as if the oldest part of my brain was whispering, "He's still there, Sunday morning, I got up the nerve, crossed the street. The gate at 112 was unlocked. I stepped in carefully, testing the ground with each step. 2 low steps led to the door. Frosted glass. I froze. I didn't knock. Looked through the side of the window. The living room was empty. No couch, no rug, no light, no sound. I walked back home, trembling, but silent, like someone who just confirmed the monster isn't real and still can't find peace. That night, he wasn't at the window, not on Monday either, nor Tuesday. But the feeling of being watched was still there, stronger even, like his absence had taken shape, left behind a kind of outline, a mold. And every time I opened my curtain, the missing silhouette was worse than the presence. Like Don DeLillo said, modern fear is more silence than scream. I follow that thought, because nothing that happened to me ever shouted, nothing chased, nothing threatened. But it stayed, and silence, when it holds its breath for too long, starts to sound like a name. The silence didn't bring peace, it only changed shape. With him gone, the window across the street became something else, a screen, a blank, a place where my mind tried to redraw him every time I looked, and I kept looking. I had no reason to, but I did. Even when I passed by with the trash, even when I opened the gate, even when I brushed my teeth and caught the reflection in the mirror behind me, my eyes always flicked toward that window, and every time it was empty, which made it worse. One morning, I heard a sound, a soft bump, like a cupboard closing, but from across the street. I froze, waited, then nothing. I laughed at myself, out loud even, said, "Jesus, relax," and opened the fridge just to do something normal. But 2 hours later, the curtain on house 112 had shifted. Not much, just a few centimeters, enough that I could see the edge of the glass, the line that had been hidden. I hadn't touched it. I started writing things down, dates, times, positions of the curtain, lights from inside the house. It felt ridiculous, but it was the only thing that made me feel real, tangible, anchored. Then came the night I forgot to log something. I was tired, ate dinner in bed, fell asleep with the TV on. When I woke up, the curtain was back to its original position. Perfect, white, still. I hadn't touched it. I never crossed the street again. I asked the neighbor, 2 houses down, the only other woman who seemed to live alone, if she'd noticed anything strange at 112. She blinked at me, confused. "That house is empty, right?" Yeah, I used to see someone there, at the window, every day." She frowned. "I've lived here 3 months, never seen anyone there." She smiled politely and added, "Maybe who was watching only you?" And I couldn't help but hear, maybe no one else saw because there was nothing to see. Then things started happening in my house. Nothing dramatic. The porch light flickered only when I stepped outside. The hallway light switch would be down, but the light's still on. My water bill spiked. I stopped using the washing machine. It didn't change. One night, I found my toothbrush wet at 3 a.m. I hadn't used it. The next morning, I called the construction office. Asked again, any chance someone was living at 112? Maintenance? Storage? Squatter? The clerk checked again. No water, no power, no meter activity. Officially, no one has opened that house since handover. I thanked her and hung up, but I didn't believe it anymore because something was using my water. Something was inside the routines of my house, and it no longer needed to be seen across the street. I put blackout paper over my windows, bought timers for my lamps, left a radio playing on loop. I told myself it was to create a buffer, to blur the edges of my day. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter because the feeling hadn't left. It had just moved closer, closer than I could explain. One night, I walked out into the street, stood in front of house 112. There was no light, no sound. I stood there for 10 minutes, then whispered, "What do you want?" Nothing moved, but when I got home, the curtain in my living room had shifted slightly from the inside. I hadn't touched it. Like Susan Sontag said, all terror is a form of knowledge. I follow that thought because now I understand something I didn't before. Sometimes being watched is just the beginning. The silence that follows is not relief, it's relocation. And now the question is not who's there, it's where is it now? And worse, what did I let in while I was trying to block everything out? I moved without telling anyone. Found a smaller place in another neighborhood, older building, more people, shared walls, no front-facing windows, no views. That was important. The new house has curtains that don't reach the floor. I keep them closed even during the day. I learned that letting light in is not always worth what it brings. The last night before I left, I slept on the floor among boxes. I didn't want to use the bed. It felt borrowed. Like something in that house had begun to live inside my choices. I barely slept. When I got up at dawn, the curtain in the kitchen had fallen, just the kitchen, just enough for someone to see inside. I didn't put it back up. I left it like that and drove away. In the new place, I avoid mirrors that reflect windows. I ignore sounds I can't locate, and I've stopped asking, "Is anyone there?" Because sometimes there is, and all they want is for you to notice. Once, just once. And after that, it's done. You open something. You let them in. I don't tell people the full story. They wouldn't believe it. There was no crime, no damage, no witness. Just a man who watched, then disappeared. And after he vanished, everything got worse. Because what remained wasn't him. It was the space his attention left behind. Like Clarice Lispector said, wherever I am what is missing. I follow that thought because that's what I brought with me. The shape of an absence, the echo of a presence that once fit perfectly into the frame across the street. Now it lives in every corner I choose not to look at too long. Every moment I feel observed, even alone. And every time I close the curtain before it's even opened. They say living alone is a kind of freedom you pay for in silence. And at first, that was exactly what drew me in. The apartment was small, brand new, smelling of fresh paint and grout. I'd bought it off the blueprint, something I never thought I'd do. But after the separation and 10 years of shared space with voices and compromises, I figured I deserved something that was just mine. Keys, garage remote, gate code. For the first time, everything was under my control, or almost. The first few days were more about organizing than living, measuring walls, assembling shelves, choosing curtains. The cabinets came pre-installed pale wood. The building's caretaker, Edson, helped me carry the boxes up. Polite, overly helpful. The kind of man who avoids eye contact, but somehow knows the name of your cat, even though you never told him. "If you need anything, just call," he said. "Thanks. I think I just need to rest now." That's when he smiled and said, "It's a very quiet apartment. Perfect for someone who likes to be alone." I hadn't told anyone that, The first thing that struck me was a towel on the bathroom floor. I thought maybe I hadn't hung it properly. Then the TV remote was face down on the couch. Tiny things, small enough to pass for carelessness. Then came the glass, a simple glass, the kind you use for water, that I'd left in the drying rack that morning. When I got home from work, it was wet, as if someone had used it and done a quick rinse. No soap. I even considered a leak, some stupid explanation. But the water was inside the glass, clean. That night, I slept badly, and I locked my bedroom door, something I hadn't done since high school. I went to talk to the building manager, a young, efficient woman with a vocabulary full of legal terms. No one has a copy of your key, just you and the front desk, and even then only for emergencies. I asked about Edson. She frowned slightly. He still works for the construction company, but he's super trustworthy, never had an issue. She smiled with that polished ease that ends a conversation gently. On my way out, Edson was sweeping the ground floor hallway. He greeted me with an overly warm good afternoon and said, "If anything goes missing, let me know." Sometimes a breeze knocks things around if you leave a window open. But I live on the 5th floor. I started taking pictures of the apartment before leaving. Quick ones. Kitchen, living room, cabinets closed, lights off, door locked. That Thursday, I saw the difference clearly. The plant in the living room, which sat near the window, had been turned inward, facing the room in one of the photos. I hadn't left it like that. And worse, the dish towel folded on the stove was now spread across the sink. I kept locking everything, but now with intention. As if locking wasn't a habit anymore. It was a plea. On Sunday, he slipped. "Oh, you changed the placemats. That green set was already fading anyway." It was Edson, in the hallway. I had grocery bags in hand. He was cleaning the elevator glass. I had never mentioned the placemats to anyone, hadn't even used them. They were still sealed in the drawer. I went back upstairs with the feeling that someone had lived there longer than I had. That night, I removed the emergency key from the front desk, said I was changing the locks for safety. The manager seemed to understand, didn't question it. I began noticing the strange smell in the bathroom each morning. Not sewage, not cleaning products. It was dry sweat. Faint, but unmistakable. Not mine. A scent left behind by someone who had only been there briefly. I checked my body, my clothes, the whole bathroom. Nothing. But the smell was there. Every day at 7:30 a.m., going by 8 a.m., always within that window, like a routine that wasn't mine. One night, I tried confronting Edson. I took out the trash just to catch him. Said I was noticing things moved in my apartment, that I couldn't be sure but wanted to report it in case someone was accessing it without permission. He listened in silence, unbothered, then said, "Strange, but are you sure you're really alone?" There was a short, hostile silence. "What do you mean?" He half smiled. "Sometimes people think they live alone, but they bring things with them when they move. Habits, memories, feelings." It was a rehearsed speech. Cold, but said far too calmly. Like someone who'd said it many times before. Like someone who'd been in a lot of apartments that weren't his. On Monday, I came home and found the mug I use for tea with water in it. Not much, just a finger width at the bottom. But I hadn't used that mug in 2 days. It was clean, but damp. I sat on the couch and looked around the apartment. Tried to see what here still felt like mine. What really belonged to me. And the feeling I had was that I was a tenant in a story already being written without me. I locked everything and started researching extra locks. Indoor cameras, new dead bolts. But deep down, I already knew the problem wasn't access. It was knowing someone had already chosen me as part of their routine. I changed the lock on Tuesday, found a locksmith online who didn't ask questions. He came early in the evening, finished in under 20 minutes. I paid in cash. Didn't tell the building I needed the peace of mind more than the policy. That night, I slept better. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake up halfway through the night listening for movement I couldn't explain. I told myself this was it. No more signs, no more doubts. I was reclaiming my space. Until Friday morning, when I opened the laundry cabinet and found something I hadn't seen before, a second key tucked behind the detergent, not dusty, not old, sitting on top of a folded rag like someone had set it down gently, like it belonged there. I stared at it for a long time, then picked it up carefully. Same model as my front door. No label, no keyring. I placed it in a Ziploc bag, put it in my drawer, and spent the rest of the day nauseous. Saturday afternoon, I left the building to go to the pharmacy. Just 15 minutes. When I came back, there was something different in the apartment again. Not obvious, just lighter. The curtains had been drawn slightly, letting in more light. The trash can in the bathroom was emptied, even though I hadn't touched it. The folded towel on the bed was straighter. And in the kitchen, near the edge of the sink, a post-it note. You don't have to change anything. You already live well. No handwriting, just that sentence neatly typed. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I sat on the floor and stared at the note until it stopped meaning anything. On Sunday, I called the building manager and told her I wanted the lock changed officially. I said I'd lost a key. She made a note, said Edson could help if I needed someone to be present for the locksmith. I said no, firmly. There was a pause. Has anything happened? She asked. I said no. Of course I said no, because there was nothing to report. No fingerprints, no damage, nothing missing, just the unshakable feeling of being uninvited inside your own life. On Monday, I installed an indoor camera. It wasn't discreet. I didn't care. I aimed it at the entrance, synced it to an old phone, and let it record while I was gone. I watched it from work, one eye on the screen all day. Nothing. Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday, just after 10 a.m., movement. The door opened. Edson walked in, calm, methodical. He didn't look around, didn't hesitate, walked straight to the kitchen, ran water in the sink, wiped the counter with a cloth, checked the dish rack, then stepped into the hallway, looked at the bathroom, paused, turned around and left. Less than 3 minutes. No sign of guilt, no fear, like it was just another unit on his list. I didn't go to the police. I knew what they'd say. He didn't steal. He didn't touch anything of value. I had no proof. He didn't have prior authorization. I didn't go to the manager either. I didn't want the note used against me. I just printed the footage, put it in an envelope, and dropped it anonymously in the mailbox of Unit 602. I knew the woman there worked for a legal firm. I never heard anything back. But Edson didn't come back to my apartment after that. He didn't have to. Now, when I pass him in the hall, he smiles. Not the sweet kind, the knowing kind, like we share a joke, like there was never anything wrong. Last week, he was mopping near the elevator. As I approached, he said, "Nice camera." Very modern. Records everything, huh? I didn't answer. He went on. But sometimes you still forget to close a window, right? Then he winked, friendly, warm, harmless, and returned to mopping. I don't sleep well anymore. Not because of noises, not because of things moved, but because of how quiet everything has become, how normal it all seems now, how easily someone can walk through your space, your privacy, and leave behind only the message that it was always theirs too. Like Joan Didion said, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. I follow that thought. But now I tell myself a different kind of story, not to live, just to stay alert. One where nothing happened, where I imagined it, overreacted, maybe even dreamed the note, misplaced the key. One where I'm still in control, even if I know that's not true. I sold the apartment, didn't announce it, didn't post pictures, just called the developer and said I was leaving. Their team came fast. Buildings like this flip units quickly. Young couples, investors, people who don't ask much. I packed everything in 2 days, left no traces, no personal touches, no hooks on the wall, no magnets on the fridge. I erased myself from that place like I was never there. On the morning I moved out, Edson was sweeping the entrance. He didn't say anything, just watched, then gave a small nod, as if approving something, as if this ending belonged to him too. My new place is further from the city, older, smaller, secondhand. But the doors are heavier, the windows stiff, the light harsher. I like it. It creaks in honest ways. I bought new dishes, changed my scent. I don't sleep with the lights on anymore, not out of courage, but because if someone comes in here, they'll have to make a sound. There are no quiet steps in this house. That's why I chose it. Sometimes I think about that first apartment like you think about a person who made you feel small. It doesn't haunt me, but it leaves a shape inside me, a carefulness that wasn't there before, a suspicion I can't quite remove, a different way of locking doors, not just for safety, but to feel like I'm drawing a line that someone else no longer gets to cross. I didn't report him. I told myself it wouldn't change anything, but the real reason is harder to admit. I was afraid they'd say it wasn't real, that I imagined it, that he was just helping, that he meant no harm. And in some quiet part of me, I feared I'd start to believe that too. Like Susan Sontag said, all terror is a form of knowledge. I follow that thought. Not the kind of knowledge you can use, but the kind you carry under your skin, behind your eyes. The knowledge that some people don't need to break in to invade. They just wait for a door to close soft enough to leave doubt. And then they move inside your habits, your smells, your quiet. People talk a lot about crimes, but no one talks about permissions that are never given, only assumed, about men who don't take. They borrow the edges of your life until you're not sure what was ever truly yours. And no one talks about how easy it is to walk away from that with no mark. I have a new lock now. 2, actually. And I still sometimes wake up and check the towel on the bathroom hook, the glass by the sink, the way the curtain folds. And when I find nothing changed, I still don't sleep. Because the scariest thing isn't that someone came in. It's that they don't have to anymore. My street is the kind you only find if you're really looking for it. No outlet, no shops, nothing special. Single-story houses, tall gates, white bars. A neighborhood for people who've already given up on the city. but don't have the money to leave it entirely. After my wife died, I stayed by inertia. The place wasn't good or bad, it was familiar, and that was enough. I spend my days tending to what's left, hosing down the sidewalk, cleaning the AC filter, heating frozen meals. Sometimes I chat with the mailman, other times with the neighbor's dog, the one that barks at dry leaves. Nobody on the street gets involved with anyone, and that, for me, was always enough. Until number 68 changed hands. It had been empty for years. The former owner left after a divorce and let it rot. The real estate agency cleaned it, painted over the walls, swapped out the gate. And then he appeared, the new neighbor. He arrived in a dark car, no bumper stickers, license plate from out of town, 2 large suitcases. That's it. No help, no moving truck. Just him. Short, thin, mid-40s maybe, scruffy beard, eyes that avoided yours, not out of shyness but calculation. I said good morning. He nodded and went inside. The first few weeks, nothing seemed off. He went out rarely, seemed to spend most of his time indoors. At night, I'd sometimes see the blue flicker of a TV through the window. Other nights, complete silence. No visitors, no noise, no interaction. If it had been anyone else, some neighbor would have started speculating. But here, everyone's tired. No one wants trouble. But trouble doesn't need permission to arrive. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke to a muffled sound. Not quite a scream, more like a low cry or a whispered plea, half swallowed. It took me a while to believe it was real. I opened my living room window, slowly, looked toward number 68. Nothing, just the hallway light on, his car in the garage. I went back to bed with a bad taste in my mouth. The next week, I heard it again. Another late night, this time sharper, like someone had slapped an open palm on something hollow. Twice, then silence. The next morning, I stood at my front gate, pretending to sweep the sidewalk. His door was ajar, no sound, no movement, seemed empty. But the car was still there. I tried good morning again. Nothing. The gate closed by itself. The third time, it wasn't sound. It was sight. I saw with my own eyes a teenage girl trying to climb over the back wall of number 68. Thin, hair tied back, oversized t-shirt. She was climbing slowly, like she didn't have the strength. She saw me, she froze, looked straight at me but didn't call for help. She was yanked back down fast. I didn't see who grabbed her, didn't hear a scream. Nothing. Just the garage door closing a few seconds later. I waited until the next day to decide what to do. Thought about calling the police, but what could I say? No name, no proof. Just a feeling that something terrible was happening a few steps away from me. Late that afternoon, I went to his gate. Knocked. He opened fast, like he'd been waiting. Yes? I couldn't speak. Just looked at him. He stared back. No smile, but not hostile either. Is there a problem? No, I said. Just wanted to check if everything's okay. He nodded, closed the door slowly. No click, no lock. That night, I started planning to go in, not out of curiosity, but because someone had to do something. And on that street, where no one looked sideways, I was the only one who saw. It was a light rain that Friday night, cold wind crawling under doors. I waited until 3 a.m. Streetlights off. Total silence. I saw the neighbor's car was gone. Maybe he'd gone out. Maybe he wasn't coming back. I grabbed a small flashlight, a screwdriver, put on my darkest coat, crossed the street in short steps. His front gate was ajar. It never locked. On the porch, I took a deep breath, turned the doorknob, unlocked. The house was cold, empty, no scent at all. I stepped in slowly, everything clean, too clean. Living room with a perfectly aligned sofa, shelves without a single crooked book, kitchen spotless, dry dishes, no clutter, no magnets on the fridge. Down the hallway, I saw a darker wooden door, latched. The latch gave easily, a staircase leading down, no ceiling, no finishing, just raw concrete and wood. My flashlight was just strong enough to show that the basement was large and in use. I took one step at a time. The smell came first, a mix of dampness, melted plastic, and old metal. In the center of the space, under a dim bulb, I saw it. The chair. Not new, heavy wood, no padding, but with leather straps on each armrest. 2 across the seat, likely for the thighs. 1 by the floor, where the feet would rest. The straps were worn, stained, stretched. Next to it, a plastic bin. I didn't want to know what was inside. A funnel, a rolled-up cloth, something with a buckle. And in the corner of the wall, a mark. Like a fingernail, it scraped into the concrete again and again. That's when I realized I wasn't breathing. I heard the door open upstairs, firm footsteps, hard soles. He was back. I killed the flashlight, froze. The light turned on upstairs, then on the stairs, and then he spoke. I thought it would take longer. His voice was calm, no rush, no shock. I didn't answer. I knew you'd come in. You're the type who comes in. Steps reached the top of the stairs, but he didn't come down. He stood there, waiting for me to climb up on my own. The problem isn't what we do, it's when someone decides to look. Silence. She needed correction. That wasn't a child. It was a mistake in progress. I just stopped the process. My hands were shaking. I wanted to run. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to die right there so I wouldn't have to understand what he meant. But all I did was climb back up. Slowly, he stepped aside. Let me pass. Are you going to tell someone? I looked at him. Yes. He smiled. Small, almost polite. That's fine. I cleaned everything already. And then, no one will want to hear it. That night, I called the police. Told them everything, the break-in, the basement, the girl, what I saw, what I heard. They arrived at 5 a.m, knocked. He opened the door. They let me go in with them. We went to the basement. The chair was gone. The floor had been washed, still wet, reeked of bleach. The box, gone. The straps, gone. A fan spinning in the corner, no evidence. The officer gave me a look, wrote something down, said they'd follow up. No one called again. 2 days later, I moved out. Didn't sell the house. Left the key in the mailbox. Packed what I had and moved to a rented apartment in another part of town. Smaller, uglier, but no stairs, no basement. On my last night, I looked across at 68. He was at the gate, hands in his pockets, neutral posture. He saw me and just nodded once. It's been 3 weeks since I left that street. I still wake up at the same time. I still leave the porch light on. I still avoid looking out the window for too long. The new apartment is small, no yard, no stairs. The door clicks loud when it locks. That comforts me. I never heard back from the police. No report, no follow-up, no confirmation of anything. Just silence that sounds like understood, or worse, like ignored. House 68 is still there, repainted, quiet, back on the market. The listing says, well-ventilated space, ideal for those seeking privacy. And I'm still trying to figure out what exactly hurt the most. What I saw in that basement, or the certainty that no one wanted to see it with me. I don't think I'm brave. I went into that house out of guilt, out of instinct. Because if I didn't, I would have become complicit through silence. But now, after all of it, the question isn't about him. It's about us, about how many people saw that girl climbing the wall and looked away, how many heard the sounds and turned up their TV, how many now say, I had no idea. The street didn't change because he chose the perfect street. Sometimes I think I made the mistake. I broke the rule, crossed the line, refused the pact that keeps neighborhoods like that going. Because seeing doesn't fix anything. It only takes away the comfort of not knowing. And when no one else wants to know, knowledge becomes a sentence. Like Hannah Arendt said, the greatest evil is the evil committed by no one. I follow that thought because that basement existed, the chair existed, and someone existed there for a while, trapped. And now all that's left is the memory. And a man like me who can't walk into a house anymore without checking if he's alone, even when he is. My name's Jeff Duncan. I'm 52, divorced, live alone. I deliver tools for a living, wrench kits, drill sets, electrical gear. I drive around a lot. Suburbs, cul-de-sacs, construction sites. I know every dead end in this town. Most days I just want to get home, heat up leftovers and watch the game. That's the truth. I'm not the kind of guy who looks for trouble, but sometimes trouble parks right in front of you. The first time I noticed it, I was doing a drop near Franklin Elementary just after noon. A plain white van, no windows on the sides, no logo, no tags, just sitting there, engine running. I thought, delivery guy, or a plumber, or some dude waiting for his kid. But 2 hours later, when I passed by again, it was still there. Same spot, same sound, still running. Didn't think too much of it until I saw it again the next day. Different street, same van. Over the next week, it kept happening. Always parked, always running, never anyone getting in, never anyone getting out. Once, it was outside the strip mall, then behind the post office, then, weirdly, 2 blocks from the church, around 4:30 in the afternoon. I started snapping quick photos, just for myself. Plates were clean, windows tinted too dark to see through, no company name, no driver ever visible, just present. Like the van was watching something or waiting. I tried not to spiral. I mean, who am I? A nobody with a good eye for parking patterns. But I couldn't let it go. Something about the way it moved. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt planned. And the kicker, that van started showing up closer to my neighborhood. One morning, I saw it parked at the end of my street, facing my house. Engine off this time. No one inside. 10 minutes later, it was gone. I talked to the cops once. Went down to the station with the photos. Said I didn't want to make trouble, just thought they should check it out. The officer gave me a tight smile. It's probably a private security unit. Sometimes contractors use unmarked vehicles. I asked if that was legal. He shrugged. If they're not breaking any laws, there's not much we can do. Then he added, You sure you're not just seeing things, sir? That shut me up. But I knew I wasn't, because a week later, I saw a little girl, maybe 8 or 9, run out from the edge of a wooded lot and bang her fist on the back of that same van. 3 quick knocks, desperate. Then she froze, looked around, and disappeared back into the trees. The van didn't move, didn't respond, didn't even blink. And that's when I realized it wasn't just a van. It was a cage, and someone was still holding the key. The next time I saw the van, I didn't wait. It was a Wednesday, mid-morning. The van was idling on a side road near the back entrance of Roosevelt Park, far from houses near where the tree line thickens. I turned off my delivery route, looped around the block, and parked 2 streets over. Grabbed my phone, left the engine running. I followed on foot. The van pulled out slow like it was in no rush. I stayed just far enough back. It turned onto a county road I barely remembered existed, half paved, no signs, no lines. It went past a crumbling fence and slipped into a gate I hadn't seen since high school. An old repair yard, abandoned, windows shattered, rust climbing the walls. I waited 5 minutes, then crossed the road and slipped in through the broken fencing. The van was there, parked behind the main building. No movement, no driver, just heat rising off the hood. I crept around the side, cracked the back door open an inch. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind you get from nature, the kind you get from insulation, from someone deliberately erasing sound. Inside, it was dim. The cargo area had been stripped bare and rebuilt. The floor was padded with vinyl, the walls lined with foam and fiberboard. It looked clean, not tidy, sterile, unnaturally so. I stepped closer. There was a backpack on the floor, bright pink, Peppa Pig. Next to it, a tiny pair of light-up sneakers, one of them scuffed at the heel, and a plastic thermos with a chewed-up straw. My stomach dropped. There were no restraints visible, no blood, no signs of struggle. But the van didn't feel like a vehicle anymore. It felt like a holding space, like someone had made this into a waiting room for something worse. I backed out slowly, heart in my throat. That's when I heard footsteps, fast, crunching gravel, coming toward me. I turned, and there he was, the driver, not angry, not surprised, just aware. Plain jacket, blue jeans, gloves. He didn't yell, he didn't run. He just looked at me and said calmly, "You shouldn't be here." For a second, I couldn't move. Then instinct kicked in. I yanked the van's back door shut, locked it from the outside, ran to my car, didn't look back. I got home and uploaded every photo I took. The shoes, the backpack, the thermos, the foam walls. Then I went to the police station again. This time, I didn't ask. I gave them names, addresses, times. I printed the map of where the van had been, gave them the license plate, showed them the photos. They said they'd assign someone to it. I asked if they'd send someone that day. They couldn't promise. So I went home and waited, because now I wasn't just scared of what I saw. I was scared of what they'd do if they did nothing. They didn't call me back that night or the next morning. By the third day, I drove back to the property myself. I knew I shouldn't. I knew what I'd find. The gate was open. The van was gone. The building had been burned from the inside out. Blackened walls, ash where the floor used to be, the smell still fresh enough to sting. No one around. No police tape, no statement, no answers. I went home and turned off my phone, but that night I checked my email out of habit. One new message, no subject, no text, just one photo. My house, taken from across the street at night. The van was parked in the corner of the frame, half in shadow, engine off, watching. I sent it to the police. No reply. I stopped sleeping after that, not deeply anyway. I started waking up at 2 a.m. like clockwork just to check the window. No van, not anymore. But the feeling stayed. A week later, I read that a girl had gone missing in a town 40 miles north. Same age as the one I saw. No trace, no suspects, no mention of a van. I printed the article. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself it was still happening, or maybe because I knew deep down I'd failed. Like George Orwell said, the further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. I followed that thought because I spoke. I brought photos, names, evidence. I did everything I was supposed to, and it didn't matter. Now, I live in a house with the blinds all the way down, where I keep a bat near the door and 2 locks on every window. I still deliver tools, still wave to neighbors, but I don't smile anymore because I know something they don't. The worst monsters don't hide in the dark. They park on your street in broad daylight and wave back. The rain had started in the late afternoon, but it only turned into a full downpour after 10. I'd been alone in the cabin since morning. It was my first free weekend in months, and I came out to the family house just to breathe. Ever since my sister's accident, I developed a certain discomfort with silence, but I was trying to treat this like therapy. The house wasn't big. 1 open room on the ground floor, couch, fireplace, a small kitchen. Upstairs, just a bedroom and a bathroom. Simple, old wood, full of the sounds old wood makes. I'm a nurse, and I haven't slept well in years. Even when I do sleep, I wake up easily, especially when it rains. My dad used to say, rain noise clears the mind, but all it ever does is make me more alert. I was finishing up a pan in the sink when the power cut out. No flicker. Just gone. Just the sound of rain pounding the roof. I grabbed my phone. 11:07 p.m. No signal. Not unusual out here. I'd prepared flashlight, candles, lighter. But still, something about how suddenly the dark came down made me freeze for a second. I went to the living room and lit a candle on the side table. The flame showed my reflection in the front door glass. My face looked older than I remembered. Damp hair from condensation, sunken eyes. I either needed more time alone or a lot less. The first different sound came from above, a sharp crack, like wood giving under weight. The cabin didn't have an attic or crawl space, just ceiling and roof. It creaked all the time, but this wasn't a creak. It was a low, dense snap, followed by total silence, like even the rain was holding its breath. I stood still, listening. Nothing. The candle flame shook, not in rhythm with the wind. I moved to the stairs and looked up. Total black. Grabbed the emergency flashlight. Strong beam, but didn't reach far. I went up 2 steps. The third let out a high-pitched squeak. Then another crack above, opposite side of the roof now. Or was it the porch? Hard to tell with all that rain. Then I noticed the latch on the back door was off. I went back down slowly, pointed the flashlight. It was slightly open, 2 fingers wide maybe, just enough for wind or something else. I froze. My chest started aching, like with patients in early panic. But I wasn't panicking, technically. My hands weren't shaking. My body was just trying to decide whether to bolt or stay frozen. I closed the door, locked it, left the flashlight on the table, and lit another candle. This one crackled loud, almost as if it didn't want to burn. And then I heard footsteps, upstairs, slow, one at a time. I stayed still for a while, no idea how long. The candle got heavy in my hand. The sound continued, Not water, not wood. Footsteps, dragging, no rush. My mind tried to explain it away. Someone must have gotten in while I was showering, earlier in the day. But I'd locked the door, hadn't I? Pretty sure. Almost. I climbed back up, one step at a time. The flashlight was trembling now. Not the beam, my hand. At the top, I turned it off and waited. Short hallway, bedroom door half open. So was the bathroom. Both pitch dark. I thought I heard a short breath, almost panting from the bedroom, almost. Could have been the wind or the pipes. Could have been my own heart. I flicked the light on, aimed at the bed, nothing. I stepped closer and saw it. Not someone, but signs. The mattress was sunken in on one side, like someone had just been sitting there. The blanket tugged slightly, the pillow caved in right in the center. No one sleeps like that. Not naturally. I stared too long. Then came another sound from below. Another crack. Maybe glass this time. My whole body reacted before I could think. I rushed down, almost slipping. No one. But the back door was wide open again. And now, muddy footprints across the kitchen floor. I grabbed my phone. Still no signal. I spotted the car keys. Thought about driving. But was it safer to run out in the storm or stay inside and wait? I sat on the living room floor near the unlit fireplace, trying to breathe. I thought of my sister, how she was scared of the dark when we were kids. I'd always say, "There's nothing out there." And now here I was, locked inside, not knowing what had been out there, or worse, what had already been inside. Maybe it was just a drifter, someone looking for shelter. Maybe the power came back on with a harsh snap. Loud, I jumped. Lights came on, TV flickered, freezer groaned. I ran to the back door and locked it again. Looked out the front window, just rain, just field, just night. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not the ones after. I left 2 days later, left the keys with my cousin. She thanked me. She never showed up. Now, whenever the power flickers during a storm, I think about the moment I realized someone could have been living with me for days, and I'd never noticed. As Raina Maria Rilke once said, fear is just the shadow side of what we still want to understand. I follow that thought, but some nights I don't want to understand anything. I just want it to be morning. My name is Jonathan Keller. I'm 34 years old, a freelance cartographer, and since last year, I've been living on a rural property in central Missouri. The house belonged to my grandfather, a man who rarely spoke, but always looked at you like he was waiting for you to understand something he'd never say out loud. After he passed, the house sat empty for years. When I lost my job at the mapping firm, I decided to move in and start over. The place is remote. A dirt road leads straight to the house and ends there. No neighbors in sight. Just one power pole at the edge of the property. It used to be a working farm, but the fields have been overgrown for years. The land feels wide and unused, like something was scraped away and never put back. I had taken on a freelance contract to update forest maps for the region, which meant I could work from home and go days without seeing another person. The cell signal was weak, and the internet barely held up. But at first, the quiet helped. At least, I thought it did. The house wasn't made for comfort, it was made to last. Thick wooden walls, narrow windows, a heavy roof that creaked in every wind. At first, it felt nostalgic. But as the cold came in and the air got heavy, The house began to feel more like a weight than a refuge. One Thursday night, it started raining just before sunset. By 11:17 p.m., the power went out. Just a sudden click, and then nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, checked the breaker box, no response. My phone had no signal either. Heavy rain, no lightning, just water and wind pressing in from all sides. When I looked out the kitchen window, I saw something that froze me in place, a white light out in the field. Low, fixed, perfectly still, maybe 150 meters from the house. Too low for a street lamp, too high for a phone flashlight. Cold, artificial, and lighting only a tight circle of wet grass around it. It didn't blink. It didn't move. I locked all the doors, turned off every light I had, backed away from the windows. The light stayed there for 30 minutes, motionless, and then, without a flicker, it disappeared. The next morning, with the sky still gray, I walked out to where I'd seen the light. There was nothing. No tire marks, no footprints, no equipment. Just a slightly drier ring of grass, like something had hovered there briefly and left without touching anything else. I came back to the house with a pressure in my chest I couldn't shake. I kept glancing out the window every few minutes. The silence inside the house no longer felt peaceful. It felt expectant. 2 days passed. Saturday night, the rain returned, harder this time. I was in the kitchen washing the glass when I noticed something off with the tap water. It came out tinted, slightly red, like rust. I shut it off quickly, smelled it. No strong odor, but the color wasn't right, like something had disturbed the pipes from the inside. I went upstairs to grab my phone, planning to take a photo and send it to the local plumber later. But when I reached the top of the stairs, I froze. The front door was open, not wide, just cracked, 4 fingers at most. And sitting on the doormat was a pair of rubber boots, caked in fresh mud, empty. My first thought was that maybe I'd forgotten to lock the door, but I always lock it, and those boots, they weren't mine. I closed the door slowly, locked it, engaged the bolt. I didn't touch the boots, I just left them there. Sunday night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a dull metal sound from downstairs. I grabbed a kitchen knife and the flashlight. The door was shut, but the metal bolt I'd installed just days earlier was lying on the floor, removed, not broken. And in the center of the living room, sitting on the rug in front of the fireplace, was a small oval mirror. Face up. I didn't own that mirror. Its frame looked identical to one my mother used to keep in our house when I was a kid. I hadn't seen one like it in years. I had no explanation for how it got there. The house was locked, the property fenced. I was alone. I sat on the couch with the knife in hand and tried to convince myself I was wrong. Maybe the mirror had been here all along. Maybe I was just tired, but I knew better. I stayed 2 more nights. By Tuesday, I packed what I could and left. I didn't take the mirror. I locked the door, but I didn't look back. I've never returned, and I still can't fully explain what happened out there. What haunts me the most isn't what I saw. It's how long I waited before admitting something was wrong. The time I spent trying to make it all make sense while something or someone kept pushing my limits. Clarice Lispector once wrote, "What truly frightens me is what hasn't been named yet." I follow that thought. And every time the lights flicker during a storm, I just hope nothing is looking back at me. I've always thought fixing old things was better than buying new ones. Maybe out of stubbornness, maybe to save money, or maybe this belief that with enough patience, everything can work again. After retiring from civil engineering, I bought my grandparents' old house in a remote district surrounded by soybean fields and dirt roads. I've spent my summers here ever since. The silence helps me think or forget, depending on the day. The house is large with high ceilings, wooden windows, and frequent creaks that betray its age and moisture. My bedroom is on the ground floor. Upstairs, there are 2 rooms I keep locked. One of them is where my mother grew up. I've never felt the urge to go in. It's just how she left it. Thin curtains, iron bed, a cloth doll in the corner. I've never seen a reason to open it. Life here is simple. I wake up early, wash my face with cold water from the leaky tap, and make coffee with cinnamon, the way my wife used to like. I still do that even alone, a widower's habit. I read, sweep leaves from the porch, try to finish an old puzzle, and sometimes I talk to myself. Not that I notice at the time. Only when I realize I've just laughed at something I said aloud. On the 3rd week of January, I noticed it for the first time. It was getting dark. I went out to close the front shutters like I always do, and I saw up there, in the window of my mother's old room, a shadow, a figure. Still, the kind of silhouette you catch in your peripheral vision and then aren't sure you really saw. I looked again. Nothing there. I tried laughing it off. Must have been the tree's reflection or the curtain swaying. But deep down, I knew the curtains didn't sway. The window was always shut, always had been. The next day, I made stronger coffee, tried to ignore the uneasy feeling. But that night, when I came back from the porch, there it was again. The same figure, the same stillness. By that point, I was starting to doubt myself. Was I seeing things? Maybe it was the heat or the loneliness. I went upstairs, got the key from my toolbox. The lock turned with some difficulty. The door creaked like it always did. The air inside smelled of eucalyptus and dust. The window was shut, the lock intact. Even so, as a precaution, I screwed down the sides of the window. 3 screws on each side. The kind of thing an engineer does to convince himself that everything has an explanation. I went back downstairs, slept poorly. On the 3rd day, the shadow didn't appear. I thought, great, hallucination solved. But on Friday, while washing dishes, I heard a sharp crack from upstairs, like wood giving way under weight. I ran up. The door to the room was ajar. I would never leave it like that. I'm not the type to forget things like this. Or am I? I don't know anymore. I opened it slowly. The room was untouched, but the window was unlatched. One of the screws lay on the floor. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to explain. Maybe it had loosened over time. Maybe I hadn't tightened it properly, but part of me no longer believed in those theories. I reinforced the lock, placed a wooden beam across it, closed the door with an old padlock. That night, I didn't go upstairs. I stayed in the living room armchair, the TV barely audible. Watched an old interview with Carl Jung. At one point, he says, "We are not haunted by what we see, but by what we refuse to see." I follow that thought. I looked out the living room window. The room upstairs was dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, as if the darkness was watching me back. I stayed in silence. And silence here is always absolute, even when it isn't. I don't remember if I fell asleep or blacked out. When I combed to, it was past 3 in the morning. The air was thick, far too warm for the season. My bones ached, like something in the space around me had shifted out of place. I got up slowly, walked to the kitchen, careful not to make noise. An old habit from when my son still lived with me. I got a glass, drank water straight from the tap. That's when I felt it. The presence. That thing you don't see but weighs on you. That you don't hear but makes everything too quiet. I turned and saw through the kitchen window something standing outside. It wasn't a shadow. It was a figure, still looking in the dark. I froze. I swear I didn't move for 30 seconds. When I finally dared to turn on the kitchen light, it was gone. I ran to the back door. It was locked. I checked every window. Nothing broken. No sign of entry. Morning came, and I was still awake, sitting on the front steps, my eyes burning. I called my sister, asked if I could stay at her place, said it was my blood pressure, the heat. Any excuse? I stayed there 2 weeks. Did I tell her what I saw? Of course not. No one tells. We just keep it inside. When I came back, the house was just as I'd left it. Almost. In my mother's room, the window was open. Again. And on the floor beneath it, a cloth. It was the doll. The one from the corner. It was in the window now. I didn't go up. Didn't go in. I turned around. Went back to the city and listed the house for sale. Never spent another night there. Weeks later, my sister called, said a car stopped in front of the house. A man got out, took a photo, and just stood there looking up at the upstairs window. He waved at you, she said, like he knew you were watching. I never spoke about it again. But I think about it. I think a lot. Maybe the mistake was going in, or maybe believing someone would come out. Like my grandfather used to say, some things only exist once you open the door.